Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this joint Centre Forum Policy Exchange event on decentralisation. The localist agenda is probably the area of greatest ideological overlap between the two coalition parties. And a lot of people, I think, have noticed the big decentralisations of public services. Police commissioners' proposals that were announced yesterday, microcredit free schools. But I don't think people have fully realised quite how much is going on elsewhere. Big changes to planning law, the changes in local government, and the hotbed of activity that is CLG. Now, it's wonderful to have Greg here to talk today. Greg is brilliantly qualified to deal with a brief like decentralisation, which cuts across every subject, because he himself was master of all kinds of policies when he was head of policy in the Conservatives. And he also shadowed the DEC brief. He also has fantastic experience of working across different parties, because of course he was once the youth leader of the STP. I'm not sure if I'm going to say that one. We're going to have a short speech from Greg this morning, followed by a short reaction from Julie Astley from Centre Forum, and then we're going to throw it open to questions and answers. So without any further ado, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Britain's first ever Minister for Decentralisation. Greg, thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Neil, and thanks also, Julian, for co-hosting this. It is fantastic to be here because this room has been the point in which a lot of these localist ideas emerged during the last 5 years. So in starting to talk about the importance of decentralisation to big society, I thought this room, this ideas space, is the place to come, and I'm grateful for that. And I'm also grateful for your research as to my earlier political affiliations that are proving useful now. I want to just lay out some of the thinking behind what we've been talking about and what David Cameron was talking last week about the big society, in particular related to decentralisation. And I do so not to lay out this morning a detailed set of policies that we want to go through in fine detail, but just really to offer you, at the beginning of the summer, the opportunity and in fact the invitation to help guide our thinking as it emerges, and to help do what you do best, which is to flesh it out and push us further where it needs to go further, and make sure that we are proceeding in a direction that is going to work and that you're comfortable with. Big society is a big idea, but what it comes down to is this. The Conservative, and I dare say the Liberal Democrat answer to collectivism isn't just individualism. As human beings, it's in our nature to join together to achieve common collective goals. And I think there are two ways in which this can work. From the top down, through hierarchy mediated through bureaucracy, or from the bottom up, through diverse forms of self-organisation. The former is what defines socialism, and the latter is what defines conservatism, and for that matter, liberalism. Last week in Liverpool, David Cameron unpacked this basic idea. The big society, he said, consists of three strands. First, public sector reform. Second, community empowerment. And third, philanthropic action. And though these strands are intertwined, they're also distinct. The first is about what the state can do for us. The second is about what we can do for ourselves. And the third is about what we can do for others. And all three are essential to the big society. And as well as this threefold explanation of what the big society is, the Prime Minister also set out three basic methods by which government can act to build it up. These are decentralisation, transparency, and a third category that I'm going to refer to as social finance. Again, these are intertwined, but also readily distinguished. Transparency, for example, is about the redistribution of knowledge, which too often is being held in a tight grip by people in authority. Social finance is about the redistribution of money, and importantly, other assets. So instead of passing down through layers of often a very absorbent bureaucracy, public funds should get straight through to whoever and wherever they can be used most effectively. And of course, there's no point in making information and funding available to the providers of social goods if they're not allowed to use them in new ways. Thus, the third and the most fundamental building block, in my view, for big society is decentralisation, which is, of course, about the redistribution of power. Now, as Minister for Decentralisation, as Neil said, the first one in this role, and clearly I think it needs to be a subtext of the role that I need to be able to abort it by the time we finish our work. That has to be the end point. But it's the issue of power that I want to focus on today, although no doubt knowledge and money will come into it too. It's a commonplace to say, and think tanks represented here know perfectly well, that Britain is one of the most centralised countries in the democratic world. The political culture of our country has been shaped over the last 20 and 30 years by successive waves of centralisation. But I do think the tide is turning. The formation of the coalition government represents a genuinely new beginning, the significance of which goes well beyond a mere change in administration. And I think this thought is emerging and taking root not just in the coalition, but right across the political spectrum. Indeed, it was only this month, I think, that speaking to the Institute for Government, Tony Blair conceded, perhaps rather ruefully, that people want an empowering state, not a controlling state. The government today has got to put power back in the hands of the people, and that's not just a slogan, it's a demand from the public. He reflected on his time. But of course, the tragedy is that Tony Blair headed a government where this was a key point of contention between its two constituent parts, the Brownites and the Blairites. One resistant absolutely to the idea of centralisation, of decentralisation, one sometimes making tentative steps but never really pursued and often overrun by the opposing forces. But today we have another government of two constituent parts, just as the previous one was. This time the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats. But this time, localism is what unites us rather than what divides us. So for the first time in decades, the most powerful forces in British politics are aligned in favour of decentralisation. So that being the case, how can we proceed? What I think is incumbent on us not to do is to take this mandate and to take the creation of a ministerial position to promote decentralisation as some way a licence to impose from the top down a very centralised, directive view of what must take place. I think that would be completely incompatible and indeed paradoxical to try to do that. It has been done before, and it would be perfectly possible to do that. I think ministers have sometimes viewed the opportunities they have, the chains of command they have, as if they were in a war room with a battle map, wanting to move pieces around that map and change things in a different way. But I think that's completely inconsistent with the ethos of decentralisation. And that's why last week in Liverpool, David Cameron introduced 4 vanguard communities who are eager to start putting the big society into practice. Rory Stewart, the MP for Penrith and Border, my colleague here, is representing one of those vanguard communities. And these are not communities that we have chosen. They chose themselves. Let me tell you, Rory came beating down the door to number 10 and Department of Community and Local Government, demanding the right to get on and do things that his community wanted to proceed with, that currently government, central and local, was standing in the way of. So the initiative was theirs. And furthermore, each of these communities will be pursuing their own projects of their own devising, taking on a blend of powers and responsibilities most appropriate to what they want to do. So from a central government point of view, there is no agenda other than to learn how we in the government can best help each community achieve their own vision of the big society. And I think this stands in obvious contrast to the old approach, which was for Whitehall to devise a pilot project, to test it out on subject communities, and then roll out the results of those tests nationwide. It reminds me of the way that antidotes to poisons are produced. First of all, you inject a small dose of the toxin into the flesh of a large mammal, like a horse. Then you extract the resulting antibodies for use on human patients. It's an approach that might work in medicine, but not in the social sphere. Scaling up identical antidotes to social problems doesn't work, because each community has its own problems and needs to find its own solutions. And moreover, if I can put it crudely, no one wants to be the horse's backside of this. But what about the problem of replication? If a community hits upon a really good idea, one that could make a much wider impact, then what's the point of confining it to just one project isn't the only way forward. A program, sometimes said, of mass injection. And I think it's a very good answer to that, and it comes from Bangladesh. In 1974, an economist that would be well known to many of you here, Muhammad Yunus, was wondering how he could help his country in the wake of a terrible famine. And what he did was to lend $27 to a group of 42 families. Not only did this allow them to escape the clutches of predatory loan sharks, it gave them the confidence and the ability to start investing in their own futures. For example, by buying a few head of livestock to generate a little additional income, enough to raise them above the level of subsistence, and enough to finance, indeed, further investments. And from this small beginning, Yunus didn't just found the now world-famous Grameen Bank, but he also established the practice of microcredit as a powerful weapon in the fight against global poverty. Looking back on those early days, Yunus made the following observation, which I think rings through the years. He said, "It never crossed my mind to ask, will this solve the problem of 50 million poor people in Bangladesh? I was simply asking myself, can I do something to help the villagers of Jobra? When I solved the problem for a few people, I felt encouraged. I realized that all I had to do was keep on repeating it. And as a result, microcredit became a global phenomenon. And if you know how to lend money to 5 people, you've learned how to do it for 5,000 people, or 500 million. Millions of different people, but also, if I might add, millions of different ways. Because in each case, the money is used by the recipient for a specific individual purpose suited to individual circumstances. But can you imagine a Whitehall version of what the Grameen Bank would have looked like as an idea? Let me paint you a picture. Suppose the story starts in 1997. First of all, I'm sure you wouldn't have just got on with it. You'd have had to convene a committee to decide what kind of livestock should be available under the loan scheme. And having settled on the goat, probably a further set of committees is appointed to decide what breed of goat would be suitable for communities across the country. Meanwhile, there would be no doubt a requirement for a special conference so that the Prime Minister of the day could unveil a new official logo for the project, perhaps even featuring a goat motif, possibly designed by Damien Hirst. And then, of course, you'd need a czar and a task force. No government idea is complete without one of each of these. And then you would roll this out across the country and perhaps have regional distribution centres for the funds and, I dare say, for the livestock. Some of them might even get built. But by the time you've probably advanced 10 years, you could well imagine that the Prime Minister's office has decided that goats are a bit passé, and actually another breed of livestock is going to be the ideal way of curing poverty. And after a further round of discussion, with another name and perhaps another logo, you'd have another group composed perhaps of retired bankers and retired officials and perhaps even retired prime ministers to conclude that the results of the programme have been rather disappointing and the better way is to lend the money to sovereign governments and have done with it that way. It's a farcical scenario, but it's not a world away from some of the top-down implementation of good ideas that I think have happened in this country over the last, not just 10 years, but over the last 30 years. But surely it's said, if you want to spread a good idea fast, you need a grand government scheme to give it legs. And again, I go back to Muhammad Yunus, who takes a different view. He argues that the fastest way to make progress is to start small. He said, for those who are considering becoming involved in social business, you don't have to wait. You can see the impact right away, not on the whole of society, but on a portion of it. It's not necessary to wait to see the impact on millions of people. Millions is a big number, but if your work has a positive impact on 5 or 10 people, you have invented a seed. Now you can plant it 1 million times. If that approach can work in Bangladesh, it can certainly work in Britain. Enjoying as we do the full benefits of the information age, there's every opportunity for good ideas to spread quickly. All the more so when decentralisation is combined with government transparency and access to social finance. But there's a further advantage to locally led innovation, and that is the freedom to take risks. Not every innovation will succeed. Some will fail, and we ought to be clear about that. But you know, the rollout of standard models across the country offers no greater protection against failure. It just means that the cost of failure ends up being nationwide. And that's why central government is so averse to innovation, in my view, preferring to fail in old and familiar ways rather than to risk new ones. However, when innovation is small scale, then the failures can stay that way, while the successes can spread, proven by experience. In other words, you lose small, but win big. So as well as speed, the bottom-up approach has the advantage of resilience. I hope I've communicated something of the ideas behind our decentralisation policy, and why they differ from what went on before, which was a much more top-down model of earned autonomy. We're already putting this into action. We've seen that the Academies Bill reached the end of its Commons passage last night, allowing parents to establish new free schools where they decide they want something different as to what's on offer. Theresa May yesterday making a statement about police commissions, allowing people to vote for someone who will hold their police force to account. We're going to take these fundamental actions across the whole of government, but I'm not proposing that ministers should just sit back while local communities get on with the job. Local innovators need a government that actively supports them in their endeavours. And the most basic thing we can do is to remove the most obvious and outrageous impositions on local freedom. By this I mean the targets, the inspections, the directives, the ring fencing, the regulations, the general bureaucracy that at the moment suppresses too much local initiative. We're already making good progress on this, especially in regards to local government. Last week in the House of Commons, I was able to point out that the consequence of us revoking the regional spatial strategies, which have bound every council in the land in very detailed prescriptions of what they need to shape their local communities to conform to, has had the great advantage of freeing them from literally a heavy load of bureaucracy. I've just brought some of the documents that we have revoked. This is for part of the published documents for one region, the southeast region, part of the documents that every council in the southeast had to go through and comply with to conform to the southeast regional plan. The full pile weighs, I think it's 33,000 pages and weighs 2 stone. I put it on my bathroom scales. If I tell you what we replaced it with, it is this document, which is 6 pages and weighs an ounce. And I think if anything sums up the approach that we want to take to get rid of the central burdens and the central detailed prescription, and to have a much lighter touch approach which empowers communities to shape their communities and to shape their decisions in their own way. I think it is the abolition of this tier of regional bureaucracy. There are examples, all my colleagues across government have similar examples of this. But I think there are in conclusion, three actions that I want every government department to take, not just the Department for Communities and Local Government. And the first of these is something that I think has become extremely important and recognised in terms of its effect in recent years, and that's a right to information, a right to know, if you like. My view is that whenever public money is being spent, people should be generally able to see how much is being spent and on what. And that should apply to central government, to local government, and to all public bodies that disperse public funds. Transparency is the foundation of accountability, but it's also a powerful means of promoting efficiency without requiring the heavy-handed intervention of an unaccountable bureaucracy requiring reports to a bureaucracy at the centre. And I think a general right to know can become much more powerful if it's joined with a second action, establishing what I call the right of challenge. And that is to suggest that the consumers and potential producers of public services should have the right to change the way that public resources are deployed, wherever and whenever a better proposal can be found. Judgments on these proposals should be made at the most local level possible, thereby enabling communities truly to take control of their own development. And we should send a clear message to the various public sector bureaucracies that their duty is to facilitate the decentralisation of power. The germ of this idea is contained in the Sustainable Communities Act, which many people in this room will be familiar with. And I think the right for communities to know what is being spent, combined with the right to challenge and replace how that is being spent, could be an idea that comes from that act that could have a seismic effect on the whole of government, central, local, and community. And so I think that we should be increasingly view this self-determination not just as a privilege to be arbitrarily and occasionally granted, but it should be a right that we should entrench in the way that we govern. And the third action that we need to take is to change the very nature of central government. Since I became a minister, one of the things that I've been struck by is the extraordinary and impressive resources that are available to ministers in government to help form their ideas, to help turn them into plans, to turn those plans into actions, and to get them enacted in legislation, to help overcome barriers to those ideas, to help bust through some of the inherited policies that might stand in the way of that. But if you take the view, as I do, that the best ideas are unlikely to emerge, at least exclusively, from ministers or indeed senior officials in Whitehall, but from people in communities, then you have to ask yourself, if these resources are necessary for ministers to be able to enact their ideas, then how can it be the case that people with ideas, with initiative in communities, can survive without access to the same degree of help and support? So I think the third action is to turn government almost literally upside down, to make sure that the support for overcoming barriers, for banging heads together where necessary, for repealing regulations, introducing new, empowering regulations where statutory provisions are needed. These resources should be available to people in communities rather than just the exclusive reserve of ministers. This is what we've done in our vanguard communities. We've set up a team in my department of barrier busters, people who are working for people in communities to overcome the regulatory, legislative obstacles, the policy obstacles, to getting on doing what Mohammed Yunus recommended needs to be done, to get on quickly and efficiently with local initiative. So that is how I think government needs to think of itself. The state should be existing to serve civil society, not the other way around. So, in conclusion, these are some of the fundamental actions that we propose to take. We have a localism bill that will be published later this year. But ultimately, and by definition, the success of decentralisation must depend on local action, and indeed upon the initiative of many people in this room today. And some of you will be pioneers of this, and others, just as importantly, will be inspired imitators, shopping around for the best new ideas and customising them for local use. And I hope it won't be long before we see significant public sector reforms spreading from one part of the country to another, without ever having appeared before in a government green paper or a government white paper. That will be a sure sign that Britain is truly decentralised and the big society has arrived. Thank you very much.
We're going to have a quick response from Julian first, and then we'll walk through the question and answers.
Yeah, well, I'm going to keep it very short because you no doubt have lots of questions. I suppose my role as director of a liberal think tank is to give the liberal reaction to that, whether that's liberal with a small L or a large L or both. And I'm nervous as I set out in my remarks about sounding overly enthusiastic and passive. But the truth is that the point you made, Greg, at the outset, which is that this is a policy agenda which quite effortlessly brings liberals and conservatives together, is absolutely right. I remember attending a Lib Dem conference a few years ago, and it had a slogan on the backdrop, as all party conferences do, and they're usually pretty anodyne and meaningless, dreamt up by marketing people. But this one actually I thought was brilliant because it summed up for me what liberalism is about. It just said, trust in people. That's all it said, trust in people. And I think that this is one of the big dividing lines in contemporary British politics, which is between politicians whose first instinct is to trust in people, to give people the power to take decisions about the things that affect their everyday lives, and those whose first instinct is towards central planning, not to trust the people, but to trust the officials, to trust the experts, to devise a plan to tell people this is good for them. And so I think that there is a very fundamental way, a congruence of instinct here, which will provide a very, very strong glue for the coalition as it goes about its business. There are issues which, of course, divide the coalition partners. That's no secret, that's the nature of coalition, but all governments need a certain amount of shared, a shared sense of mission and purpose to hold them together, and I think that it is the agenda you've outlined today, Greg, which provides that. And it's an agenda which, from someone who works at the think tank's perspective, is extremely exciting, because I don't even think we can see the edges of it yet. I mean, it is so vast. I mean, it potentially, it leads us to the transformation of the way in which government does its business across every policy area. The destination, I suspect, is still over the horizon, and I don't think that's a problem. I mean, to a conservative audience, I would simply point out that when Margaret Thatcher came to power in 1979, a lot of the things that she is remembered for, her legacy, were not in the 79 manifesto. And I suspect that the decentralisation agenda, the localism agenda, the big society, call it what you like, is a similar sort of thing. It is an iterative process that the coalition will feel its way through over the years. It will evolve and take shape and substance over time. But the direction of travel is very, very clear, and it's one I welcome. And final point, which is a sort of specifically liberal one, which is that I'm excited about the fact that the two parties, I think, in this area are genuinely adding value to each other's ideas. There's clearly been a cross-fertilisation of ideas between the two parties. Within the Lib Dems, there has traditionally been a strong emphasis on local government, and localism in Lib Dem circles has often been about the revitalisation of local democracy, and I think that is right and that is essential, and often the hollowing out of local government over recent decades, I think, is very much to be regretted. But here's the key point. Where I think something has been added to this agenda is that I think moving power, even substantive powers, revenue-raising powers, from one set of politicians and officials to another set of politicians and officials, from Whitehall to the town hall, is an essential but insufficient part of what needs to be done. And I think that we need to look well beyond that. It was Woody Allen, I think, who said that the world is run by people who turn up. But the same is true to a certain extent of local government. And what I think is important is that the government looks constantly for ways to empower people who don't have time to turn up, people who are too busy working or bringing up children or caring for relatives or whatever it may be, to engage with local government, with all that involves, let alone to stand for local government. So yes, the reinvigoration of local democracy is an essential and important part of this, but we must go beyond that to look for ways of empowering individuals in their everyday interactions with public services, community groups, through new forms which we may not even have thought of yet, but bringing people together in new ways, in new forms, so as to allow them to take control of their own communities and their own lives in different ways. So I'm going to shut up because I know you all have lots of questions. I hope that wasn't too gushing, but for a liberal, this is genuinely exciting territory. And as I say, I think that the two parties coming together are adding real value to each other.
Now, we do have a little bit of time for questions and answers. I appreciate it is very hot in here. Please, this is not a sort of totalitarian Cameroon edict, but if you're wearing a tie, please do take it off. Strip off it. It'd be very helpful if you put your hands up, you say who you are and where you're from. I thought I might quick off with a question which actually follows on from what Julian was saying about local government. There's all joke about how local government isn't really local and it's not really government because it doesn't really speak to your neighbourhood, big area. And it's not really government because it often, in recent years, it's just been implementing the will of central government. Now, Greg, I think what you were saying about your whole philosophy being about the replacement of targets and controls with the right alignment of incentives is absolutely the right way to go. Our department moved incredibly quickly to strip away all these controls, the CAA, all the different types of central controls like the ones you held up, which are about dictating to local government. But the other side of the coin, can you tell us about that how will you get the alignment of interest right? You talked about having a review of local government finance, that might be part of it. I've seen Eric Pickle speculate about the way that local councils are elected, but I'm sure there's much more to that. How do you get to this point that Julian was making about how you make local government really accountable for the dynamic?
Well, I think it's at various levels. I mean, the first thing is that anyone that's been in local government over the last 20 years or so, and I have been given this room, will know that actually so much of the role is about looking up and seeing what you've got to comply with and being too much of a sort of branch office of the white eye. That does not only kind of sap morale, but set you into a pattern of behaviour that will take some breaking out of, which is why I said in my remarks that there are some people who are absolutely champing at the bit, raring to go, people making proposals to us, can we get on and do this, people, councils asking for allies before we've enacted the bill, and that's fantastic. There'll be others, as I mentioned, that will see that and follow us. But there'll be some, I think, that are going to take some time to recognise that actually the set of directions and instructions that we've got rid of are not going to be replaced with another. I mean, it is extraordinary some of the conversations you have, so right, you've got rid of those, but now tell us what you want us to do. Well, actually, we're not. The whole point is that you're going to do what you want to do. And I think it's as Julian says, that what they want to do will not be known, certainly to us, yes, and may not be known to them, yes. There will be, I think, more innovation that comes, that wells up, that can't be sort of planned in that way. In terms of accountability, I think having accountability, which is pretty much exclusively to the top, to the centre, audit inspection arrangements that weren't just about testing financial robustness and propriety, but actually testing whether you were operating in the way that was mandated that you were operating. I mean, that is a version of what audit and accountability should be about. So getting rid of that, I think at least allows more accountability to be truly local. I think the right to know that I mentioned is an important part of that. And again, some people might find it uncomfortable and inconvenient to have to reveal, as they will in councils, all spending over £500. That is, I think, a right that citizens will have against their councils, not just the councils, against other public bodies. And if we have the further right to be able to take action to do things in a different way, then I think you're introducing a relationship between the elected and their electors that is more of a genuine relationship rather than a reporting back to them of what they're doing to please the government.
There's a microphone that's probably trying to work its way towards you.
Sarah Buckley from the Institute of Chartered Accountants. I wanted to ask about the slight tension between that democratic accountability you talked about and decentralisation, which will inevitably lead to diversity, especially in public services provision, where you're allowing schools and local health authorities to determine what their outputs and their priorities are going to be. In terms of securing a kind of popular mandate and popular support for this idea, how do you counter the problem that people are inevitably going to start comparing what's happening in the next local area, in the next region, and deciding that they like that instead, and complaining about a lack of uniformity?
That is the object of the exercise. I want people to do exactly that. I want people in one district to say, have you seen what's going on next door? That our council tax is being reduced because of the actions that they've taken, that they're providing services in a different way. Why on earth are we not having this here? And I want them to rise up and march on the town hall and kick out their councillors if they are proving resistant to that. I think you can't get innovation if people are not able literally to try something new. And without that ability to compare and contrast, I don't think you're going to get the kind of progress that we need. And the kind of it's the transformation really in local debate and local ways of doing things. There is too little that's local, and I welcome that, and I want to create.
Question from you.
Thank you very much. Tino Hernandez, I represent the Royal Town Planning Institute. We represent most appearance or large amounts of appearance planners. We've been generally very supportive of the government, not always popular, so I've always been very supportive about the localism debate. There are challenges for the profession, but also some tremendous possible opportunities. The question I had ties in with what Julian mentioned, and also what you said, Greg, about the big society and the strand about community empowerment. How do gender empower communities in a new way? As most of us are aware that there are the usual suspects with the loudest voices. Does the government want to encourage new groups of the communities to have this voice, or does the government say we're providing you with the possibility to make a voice heard? It's up to you if you want that voice heard.
I think the first thing, you've got to allow people to have if they have a voice, to use it. At the moment, often there are too few opportunities for communities to express themselves. So if you provide the outlet for local action, then I think there will be a greater propensity to use it. I think it conforms to this business about comparing and contrasting. I think you would have a neighbourhood who come together and participate in formulating a plan from the Town Planning Institute. If they can shape their plan in the way that reflects the wishes of that community, and with it confidence that a lot more funds are coming to that neighbourhood through the planning system, through the returns that will come from development, then you've got something there that actually you can do fantastic things with. You can shape a neighbourhood in a way that we haven't been able to for decades. And I suspect that some people will take that up with great language and be quickly followed by other people.
Quite a few questions, so I'd like to take two together.
Against Hayman LGC. Just as an example, when say Greater Manchester comes to you and says, well, okay, we said we can do what we want control over our buses, completely regulate them as London enjoys, we want more flexibility to borrow, we want tax increment financing, we want to be able to commission employment programs, skills, we want our own housing budget. You're going to have to say, interesting, not in my power to give. You have to go and talk to DWP, BIS, DFT and Treasury. All departments that traditionally are not on board with this agenda at all and actually are already taking actions to centralise some of those things.
Thanks. I think everyone seems to be agreeing that decentralisation as an idea is extremely exciting, and the idea is, of course, that it's going to have an influence on all departments, as my friend has actually just sort of pointed out. But do you think there are some briefs where it's going to be less easy to implement? I mean, I'm thinking, you probably guessed already, of something like energy, where we've pretty much declared ourselves in a state of emergency in terms of infrastructure, and where an idea like this could potentially cause problems.
You're absolutely right that a lot of the central state is in the hands of different departments that need to be sort of wrestled to concede the powers that I think are necessary for this. And that is the reason, I dare say, for creating a post of Minister for Decentralisation across government. When David Cameron asked me to do the job, it was from the Department of Youth and Local Government, but with the remit to cover the whole of Whitehall, and indeed to report to him by next summer on what every government department has done with regard to this. So it is a demand, it's a requirement for every department of government, and it needs that because that has been one of the, I think, the greatest sources of entrenching the power of the centre. That it's been, paradoxically, within the centre, rather diffuse. We've had different organisations within central government, all equally remote and equally impenetrable to people who want to take initiatives. But I think it needs someone to be able to bang heads together, to be able to do that. That is part of the brief. Jessica's point is to who are there going to be departments that are going to be sort of cooler about this and some that are going to be more resistant to it. I think that's clearly the case, just as I said that there are some local councils that are going to be championing at the bit, and some of them there are some gradually blinking into the into the sunlight from the cave that they've occupied in recent years. And I dare say that is true of government departments. But it's certainly the case that it's not just my own department that is in the vanguard of this. I, of course, mentioned the work that we've done. But what is happening in education, clearly giving parents and teachers the right initiative to set up schools, that is clearly consistent with that. What Theresa May is doing in her Home Office, very much in line with this. So I think there's a great sense, and it's exactly as Jim said, it crosses the political boundary, as far as there is one, between our two parties in government here. You couldn't tell from the different degrees of enthusiasm displayed by the ministers whether they were conservative or liberal. This is absolutely shared, and I think the more that it continues, it will be a bit like councils, but actually there will be prestige in decentralising power, and the opposite. I think there will be a different view will be taken when I get my report to the Prime Minister of those departments that are trading in the wake.
Question in the gentleman back, and then the lady behind.
Dan Caplan, BTO Public Affairs, and a former parliamentary candidate for the Conservative Party. Isn't part of the problem with the decentralisation agenda, even though I support it, that voters tend to hold the government responsible for actions, regardless of where they take place? So if you have elected police chiefs, if you have academy and free schools, if you have decentralised health providers and services, it doesn't really matter what happens locally. If there's a problem, the government minister and the government will be held responsible for what goes on there. So how do you change the culture of voters to hold the local level responsible for what goes on, and not necessarily central government?
Judith Salmon from London First. Inevitably I'm going to highlight that London is of course different, and the reason we have a mayor is because there was a perceived need, including from the boroughs, for an element of coordination of strategy and delivery across the capital. We're now seeing that becoming a part of it with the proposals that were put into the Secretary of State last week, particularly around planning, where the boroughs want to pretty much remove the mayor's role. Can you just sort of explain your perception of London and whether the government does indeed see London as different from authorities outside the capital?
Dan's absolutely right on in saying that people often do look to central government rather than local levels for things. Actually, even more than that, people don't know who's responsible.
So it seems to be like an aerial assault going on outside those windows. What's the story again?
I dare say Rory Stewart's experience as a I dare say Rory Stewart's experience as a constituency MP is the same as mine. A lot of people come to see their Member of Parliament, their Member of the Westminster Parliament, to help take action on a very local issue, because actually they're often the only recognisable person in what seems to be a sort of vast and faceless bureaucracy or set of government institutions, and they're the only person that they feel has a presence and a personality in their communities that they sort of feel that they can have a relationship with. And I think that needs to change. People ought to be able to see other people in their communities that they know can make a difference. I do think it requires a change in the culture of Parliament as well, actually, to be less risk averse. When I first came into Parliament, I was on the Public Accounts Committee in the House of Commons, and I was always conscious that whenever you had an inquiry, it was always into something that had gone wrong, basically. Public money had been wasted, and the permanent secretary, as the accounting officer, had to appear before the Public Accounts Committee. And if ever any of my colleagues had not read the National Audit Office reports before the meeting, and were therefore perhaps a bit exposed about what line of questioning we were going to follow, there was always a question that I noticed that they could ask that had devastating results. And that was this: it was to say to the Permanent Secretary, before the National Audit Office had published this report, were you aware of this problem in your department? And you could see that permanent secretary sort of turned white when this question was developed. Because if they said, well, yes, I was aware of this problem, then the supplementary question was, so you were well aware of this problem, and for 3 years you allowed it to continue to exist, and it was only being hauled up here before us that you even thought about doing anything about it. And by the way, how much are you paid at the moment? Devastating consequences there. Or if they were to say, well, actually, I wasn't aware of this problem. And you say, and what kind of organisation are you running? You are or you're not the permanent secretary of this organisation? And just the consequence of that kind of approach, that everything that went wrong had to be blamed, had to be pinned somewhere, I think has a very chilling effect on innovation. And so I think we in Parliament should exercise a bit of temperance here and recognise that in a more diverse system some things can work and some things are not. On the London side, I mean, London is unique in the sense that it has a mayor covering an area with London boroughs, and they, as it were, sort of coexist. And I think what you will find here, and this is perhaps the sort of shape of things to come, is that there are discussions, there are negotiations going on between the mayor and the borough. We have been very clear that the Secretary of State is not going to step in and impose a solution that has been dreamed up in his office on some of these issues that are being discussed in London. And I'm very confident, time will tell, that the boroughs and the mayor will agree a settlement in which their respective powers, responsibilities are joined, and they will come with a proposal as how they want to organise things that will have the consent of the government. And I think that is the shape of things to come. We see this in other parts of the country. In Manchester, for example, Greater Manchester, the authorities there, freed from the regional strategy, are already working very amicably to come up with policies on issues that transcend the boundaries of the particular boroughs that make it up. So I think that is happening in London, and I expect it to bear fruit and to be a lesson that we should expect, that there will, what we're proposing here is going to be vibrant, and there are going to be debates, and there are going to be quite some vigorous discussions in every locality. I think it's better that happens locally and in public, rather than all of these things being resolved behind closed doors through appeals to the Secretary of State and directions from him.
I just wanted to add a very quick word relating to the first question, which is that if I had a criticism, I think, about the way in which the big society agenda has been communicated so far, it is precisely that it has allowed its opponents to portray it as DIY government, DIY public services. I don't know how many of you saw the Labour Party broadcast that came out before the election, when there was this sort of harassed housewife mum who was late to pick up the kids, and she had her lollipop stick leaning against the fridge and her police support officer's hat on top of the fridge. And it's this idea that not only did she have to raise a family and the rest of it, but also run these community centres. I think that is probably not really where this agenda is going to be real for most people. I think it's less about encouraging people to become producers than it is about empowering them as consumers, as users. And I think that, if I had a small criticism, it is that, take a concrete example, the schools thing, I don't think there are going to be that many parents setting up their own schools. What I think there are going to be are charities, philanthropists, universities, businesses and others who will be doing this, and thereby giving parents greater choice, more voice in schools.
Two more questions towards the front here.
Hi, I'm Helen Longworth from Oxfam's UK Property Programme, and the big society that you described today seems to be like a classic international anti-property development model, and it's great to hear really that combination of things. So there were 2 points that I'd like you to expand on if you can. And one is on the vanguard and community, so looking at the barriers that people face, because property is not just about building up things for structural causes. And that's the first time I've heard this part of the idea, which was the big gap in management. model. So if you could expand on what the role of civil society is in that part of the community, breaking down the structural barriers and that expertise that exists in charities and civil society, drawing together national trends in where gaps are the communities are facing, that would be lovely. And one of my other questions is about the comment about the world is run by people who turn up, and one of our findings from recent research was in a job centre in Thornaby, which said they assumed that women didn't want to work, but no one had asked the women, and no one had looked at whether actually the job centre was only open at times when the childcare provision wasn't around, so women couldn't go. And because of things like the gender equality duty and that kind of thing, we're able to hold counsellors and hold people to account. So some things that might seem like barriers to some communities might be safeguards for others. So how would that interplay happen when people maybe don't have the capacity to take the seats around the board table and where they are?
Matthew Bocock, I chair the Community Foundation Network. The view from community groups would be that a large part of the problem is local government, not the solution. And I think there's a huge challenge that you face because people at the grassroots are fundamentally disempowered, often by local government and by the officials within local government. You therefore end up with a fairly small group of voluntary councillors who actually exercise remarkably little power because they don't control many of the bureaucrats within the authorities. And the real challenge is to hold up this big idea with some bits of scaffolding which don't involve local government.
Good points, and I think it's, I want to be absolutely clear that decentralisation is not just from central government to local government. It is to communities, it's to individuals, it's to groups, and a lot of this is about giving rights to people against local government, not in a sort of punitive way, but the rights to information, the rights to take initiative and not to be thwarted. And I think we will see a change there as people avail themselves of these rights. But I think it's very important that we recognise that. I think it's also, there's sometimes, I think, a bit of a sort of metropolitan snobbery about local government, that actually, these are the kind of areas that are most resistant to change, and that Whitehall does this so much better. Whatever the challenges, and I think there are challenges in making sure that communities, that local government is responsive to communities and to individuals, the benchmark we've got to compare it with is the record of central government over the last 13 years in terms of responsiveness, in terms of efficiency, in terms of the having an open ear to people in communities. I don't think that's a very high hurdle for the best local authorities to clear. When it comes to the Vanguard Council, is Rory Stewart still here? He's nipped out. I was going to ask Rory to say a few words about that. But the idea of these Vanguard Councils, these are people that have come to us with particular initiatives. There is one of the things that Rory approached us with on behalf of one of his villages in the Upper Eden Valley in Cumbria was something that conforms classically to the types of rights that we want to establish. The community want to build a path from the station to the centre of town. They feel that they can do this, they can get on with it, they can finance it from their own resources, but they are blocked from being able to do it by a number of different agencies that are involved. And what they need is someone who can do two things. One is give them permission to get on and do it. And sometimes the state that we're in is a lot of people sort of hesitate before acting, even if there isn't a specific barrier that they can identify. Because actually, if we do it, there's bound to be something that we haven't thought of or forgotten about, and then we'll be, then the officials will descend on us and will be held responsible for it. So to say, and this is I think a transitional stage, I don't want us to be in this stage forever, but to say, right, you've told us what you want to do, we will cover your backs, you get on and do it, I think is one of the things that I'm sure if Rory was still here he would say is important. And the other is, going back to the point earlier, sometimes there are different government departments and sometimes there are extant regulations that do stand in the way that requires someone in the centre to look at to see whether they are necessary and and to get rid of them if not, and to amend them if they can be done.
Very good. Now, I think we're nearly out of time. We do a quick last run of questions. There's a gentleman in the aisle and a lady in the red.
Thank you. David Hall from Tribal. I think the decentralisation agenda is a fantastic agenda. In my particular area, I've worked in social housing for a number of years and been quite involved in trying to decentralise social housing around the central government. So I think it's excellent that this agenda is there, and hopefully that will continue in social housing. It's a more general question though, rather than specifically social housing. Obviously, one of the particular areas that government has a traditional role for is allocation of funds down to a public level, and this is probably more of a question for your Treasury colleagues, but I'm sure does tap into what you're looking at. And so the question is really to what extent moving this forward could be the, instead of the allocation of resources coming down from central level, there being a sort of local taxation at a local level, not only perhaps within the local authority itself, but then further down, taking up on the agenda that's been raised already. And maybe in the field of social housing in particular, whether there's scope for individual authorities or individual communities to set their social rents at a level that they choose to.
There's another question later.
To you for your growing public affairs, we must be psychic. So I was also going to ask about the money, because none of this is possible without proper amounts of money. We've heard various things about doing bank accounts, contradicting reports about how much is going to be available, unless that capital is freed up. None of this is ever going to get off the ground. So can you give us some idea of how much is available and what might be a realistic timetable for releasing it?
I think money is important, as I mentioned, and if you are to empower neighbourhoods, I think they need to have, as well as power, they need to have some money available. And we've started a review of local government finance, and obviously I can't preempt the conclusions of that. But there are things already that are pointing in this direction, that are moving money in this direction. One of the things that we've been clear about in the coalition agreement, and we'll have more to say during the months ahead, is about the incentives for housing and other economic development. There will be substantial revenues that will accrue to local communities. By local communities, I mean not just planning authorities, but neighbourhoods that come from building housing, for example, or building new economic developments. These will sometimes for the first time inject into a neighbourhood a reliable flow of funds that gives them something to discuss and to allocate for the first time in the case of neighbourhoods. So I think already that's happening. And in terms of, I'm always very resistant and allergic to this kind of concept of new money that is sometimes mentioned. I mean, there's no new money. What I think is important is that, as it were, the old money should be available much more widely. And part of what I mentioned as the right to information, the right to know, and the right to challenge, is to say for the existing, very large sums of money that are spent on behalf of our communities, rather than that just being a settlement that's given and is sort of completely off limits for anyone to discuss how this should best be spent. This should be the centre of local debate. If a local council, a local neighbourhood, a local provider of services can demonstrate convincingly and rigorously that they can do things in a different way for the same money or for less money, they should have a right to have that seriously considered. So I think I want to open up the money that is spent to make it more accessible to people, councils and in neighbourhoods.
Well, brilliant. I'm so sorry we have run out of time. I was intrigued by your answer there about the idea of a neighbourhood planning guide. It's fascinating. Also, you told the story during your speech about how if central government were trying to do a microfinance scheme, they would build this national scheme and they would roll it out and then make a mess of it. I've got a feeling that actually did happen. The government in about 2000 did try and do a national microfinance scheme and it totally destroyed the industry. I don't know if they have goat mural designed by Damien Hirst, but everything else actually really did happen. And haunted by your story about Rory's path. It's a wonderful illustration of the infantilizing, the terrible effects that highly centralised government can have on our civil society. I think that's a wonderful image, and for that reason I can only really wish you the best of luck and hope that you do yourself out of a job. But it only really remains for us to thank you in the conventional way. Thank you so much.